Good morning, everybody. Looks like we have similar numbers as yesterday. Hope everyone's doing well and hope the course is going well. I won't do it now because it's the first lecture this morning, and I know we're still trying to wake up a little bit here. But I'll do what I call quick review questions. This is sort of to maintain our recall instantly with regard to things I threw at you yesterday. And quite frankly, touch on those things that are what I call target rich. But let's do that between this lecture and the next lecture. So complications in head and neck surgery. The reality is that like all of the lectures we have, we could touch on so many things as a matter of learning as a whole, but the reality of being more practical and drilling down to what we need to know for boards. I have chosen a specific number of complications. The topic is specific to head and neck, and these are very target rich. This will be a patient who has started with the following condition. T1 left mid-vocal fold squamous cell cancer with the intent for CO2 laser chordectomy. And during the procedure, the cottonoid pledget catches on fire. Which of the following steps do you not take? A, remove pledget. B, irrigate airway with normal saline. C, evaluate rest of airway for burns. D, change endotracheal tube if damaged. E, increase oxygen concentration to 50% to keep the oxygen saturations above 90%. Answer? E. Awesome. Look at you guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So early in the morning, it kind of wakes me up too, so thanks. That is exactly right. This question isn't a trick question, and you hope that questions come in at you so obviously, but the fact that it's so obvious is an important part of this, right? Let's go over some things that we should remember about preventing airway fires and touch on the things that are critical for boards. We know that there could be complications to both personnel and patient, and things need to be done to protect against injuries like the one on the lip there, which includes coverage of the exposed areas during a laser case. The laser cases obviously will depend on whether you're doing them through, rigid endoscopy of the larynx, or if you're doing surface laser work. All of those are taken into account in terms of injury to both personnel and patient. Prevention, as we talked about, is paramount in terms of eye protection. One thing to keep in mind for the CO2 laser, that the CO2 is invisible. Yes, we know that. But sometimes it's one of my favorite questions to ask a sub-eye rotating. I know that sounds mean, but it's actually a great question, not because I'm trying to trick them, but trying to teach them. And what color is the CO2 laser as we're moving around the little red spot, and they're thinking that's the answer, right? But it's actually the helium neon spot, like a laser pointer, that's separate, and then we have to make sure they're aligned, and that alignment can be off if we don't connect things appropriately. Now, the reality is I think most of us are using this less and less, and using a lot of contact type laser, such as OmniGuide and other deliveries, and different types of formats. Careful coverage, protect the airway and mucosal distally. Let's talk about the fire triad. The triad is very important. The centerpiece of a lot of our decisions are not just from our practice, but from anesthesia and the American Society of Anesthesiologists. There's the oxidizer. Oxygen and nitrous oxide both serve as an oxidizer, which is part of the ability for fire to perpetuate. Oxidizer-rich environments increase likelihood and intensity of combustion. So, for example, in my role as quality chair for actually not just ENT, but Department of Surgery for several years, and perioperative services, so I had the pleasure of overseeing not just our specialty, but every body. It was great because it was fun developing all these relationships with everyone from colorectal to cardiothoracic surgery, where they had to improve their outcomes under my watch. And it was very successful, quite frankly, because of my style. But one of the things that I think is important is that the whole decision around reduction of complications such as airway fire important. One of those was a tracheotomy performed on a different service that led to a fire that was a temporary combustion, which basically happened where the oxygen-rich environment that was being delivered unintentionally was spreading under the sheets. And obviously, with the bovie on stun, during the course of a tracheotomy, there was a combustion of that oxygen-rich environment with the poof of the sheets going up and then coming back down, and various areas of a patient having a very superficial burn. And these are things that clearly are avoidable with the understanding of what's happening. Within the concentrations is everywhere, possibly even in the closed system with the endotracheal tube. So just because you're not working with the oxygen escaping for the moment, the reality is you can light up that area within the endotracheal tube and turn that into what's referred to as a blowtorch effect, with the fire shooting down the endotracheal tube and into the distal airway. So all of those things need to be considered as places where the oxidizer can build up. And one of the critical steps towards reducing that is the scavenger suction that can be in place both, intraorally or within the field. We know that is a standard that we use. And then obviously FiO2 as low as clinically possible. That FiO2 was traditionally, if you look at previous boards, we were talking about 40%, but the ASA guidelines went down to 30%. And quite frankly, now it actually says the lowest possible FiO2, because the reality is any oxygen is still a risk, but the patient still needs oxygen. So you need to go to that balance that is clinically relevant to the patient's ability to maintain their oxygen saturations at the lowest FiO2 possible. And then finally, the helium plus oxygen. Recognize that this is one of the options you can deliver. I don't know that this is going to be something that you would be asked a multiple choice, but if you were, for example, in oral boards, being asked what are ways to reduce risk of fire, you should be able to describe the use of helium plus oxygen or heliox. And then I don't think you'll have to explain how it works, but certainly recognizing that it does work is important. But how does it work? And is it worth covering that? Well, I think my best analogy of understanding helium plus oxygen is sort of hearkening to where I'm originally from, which is Missouri, and my days of canoeing on one of the creeks and rivers in Missouri. So yes, I am an Asian hick from Missouri by definition then, but with that in mind, I'm able to actually be an expert on what I'm about to say. So canoeing on one of the rivers is clearly faster in the middle of the river, but as you get closer to the shore, you slow down, and that's because as the water is running down a channel, it is dragging along the shores, but moving faster in the middle. And that's that's how airflow occurs in the endobronchial tube, right? And within the trachea and bronchi, that same effect occurs where the centralmost portion of the airflow is the fastest, while everything along the side is dragging. So you'll get this this column of delivery of oxygen that shoots down. And one of the things that helium does when it's added, it actually reduces the drag along the lateral wall, the circumferential drag that occurs, and improves the ability for that spike of the central portion of the airflow and the delivery of oxygen to actually deliver faster with less resistance. And now you have an understanding of how helium plus oxygen works by picturing me canoeing in Missouri. Again, I'm all about imprinting, it's like give you something that you just hold on to without thinking too much, right? That's a great way of holding on to trivia stuff here, right? Ignition, electrocautery devices, lasers. We just talked about that. Don't forget that drilling is going to hit metal sometimes and cause a spark. Light cables themselves may not cause a spark, but as you know, they get hot enough, the xenon light sources can get hot enough on the tip to actually light up a gown. And that's happened to me personally very early in my career. Well, when the cable got disconnected and was resting on my gown and it caught on fire. Very small area, was recognized early. So no harm done there, other than to make a very graphic way of learning what can happen. Keeping in mind about electrocautery devices, it's very interesting. We always use Bovie, and quite frankly, you'll hear people argue about which level of Bovieing they do. I do think that a lot of head and neck surgeons tend to have the Bovie on high, like myself. I'm sort of a 20 to 30 person type of Bovie setting, and typically on 30 when I'm at the resection phase. But a lot of I've heard that and some of my previous colleagues were actually up to 40 for certain cases. And there's no question that the more elevated that count is, the more spark you can get. In fact, just even at the lower levels, you could continue to get sparks that can start things. So keep that all in mind. I think you're all very well aware of that. Fuel is the endotracheal tube. This is bad. This is better. This is good here. This is not, and this is good here, but it's not good here. So keep that in mind. This is a tube that got lit, not lit like party lit, but lit like I'm on fire lit. And the lit was the part that was not protected in a case I was involved in. And anyway, the temporary nature of this was because of early recognition and controlling the situation without harm to the patient because of early recognition. But clearly our tubes are different. This was the old school sort of taking a regular tube and wrapping it with metal tape. And now a lot of the tubes now have that. Just keep in mind, even the current tubes can still be lit into a airway fire. And that's because if you have blood on a tube and you keep hitting that same spot, you could superheat that blood and you can melt the tube, and then you could create a passageway into which the laser and activity of lighting can occur. Protecting the patient, remembering one of the big ones now is preps with alcohol and allowing time to dry, not letting that leak onto drapes and then let that sit around and then light that up. I think it's very important that we respect at the timeout, it's critical, it's mandatory that we respect the timeout about how long it takes for the prep to dry. And we own that. It doesn't mean because you have alcohol, in order to prevent all airway fires, you just throw everything out with alcohol in it and never use it again. And that's really naive and too overarching. You know, this blanket policy approach to trying to prevent things. There's been many instances of institutions that have got rid of alcohol preps to reduce fires, and they still had fires, right? Because it's not about just the alcohol, it's about everything else. And besides, dual alcohol prepping, alcohol plus other, whether it's chlorhexidine or betadine, is going to be more effective than single element alone. And in the head and neck area, that's mainly for head and neck cases. We won't get into prepping. We just recognize alcohol solutions can cause contribute to fires. What do you do when you have it? Remove cottonoid, endotracheal tube, whatever is on fire, obviously remove it and then reestablish the airway. Intraoperatively, you evaluate for what has been damaged, and postoperatively, you consider everything you can to reduce long-term sequelae, which may be unavoidable depending on the extent of damage, and therefore surveillance for any circumferential scarring that can occur in an airway in the future. All right, that's pretty straightforward. The next complication is in the same patient. So this poor patient 2 years later develops advanced stage recurrence. Well, it's interesting. If you bring up the FiO2, you still need to 100% and you pre-oxygenate, you still need time to bring everything down. Because giving it to 100% is going to be a natural thing you do up front anyway. A lot of anesthesiologists and ENT will coordinate about how much they really need to have for that, and always recognize that you can dial it down. So it depends on their functional status and their ability to stay on the FiO2 saturation curve at the level with the minimum amount of FiO2. So I don't think that dialing it up and bringing it down, it's like saying you're one of my favorite analogies, if you